I'm about to butcher these names, but ISS is directed by Gabriella Copperthwaite and written by Nick Schaefer. It tells the story of a group of astronauts living aboard the ISS when a World War III-like scenario breaks out on Earth and the astronauts receive orders to take over the ISS. So I didn't have a lot of high expectations going into this movie just based on the trailers alone, but I thought the concept was interesting and that did hold up as one of the better parts of the film. The concept just kind of made you want to see what happens, and there were actually some really good moments of tension throughout the film. Before everything breaks down, there's a lot of character building that happens, which could feel a little bit slow, but I honestly was kind of interested. I feel like the actors did a really great job of bringing these characters to life and keeping me invested in their stories. While the overall film wasn't the best, and we'll get into that in a little bit, I think there's something to be said about the performances and what they brought to the characters. I actually ended up really caring about some of these people by the end of the film. Before everything hits the fan, there's a scene where they're looking at the Earth from space, and they talk about seeing it without borders and humanity just working together and living together as humans. And I actually really liked that scene. I thought it had a pretty decent impact. Unfortunately, I think that's about where my positives end. This movie leaves a lot to be desired. The ending especially, I'm not going to spoil it, but man, it really wasn't very satisfying at all. Nothing really gets resolved in my opinion, and I really feel like that's a shame, because there was definitely a potential for a really good story here, and again, the concept was excellent, but it almost felt like what was happening on Earth started to become more interesting than what was happening on the ISS, and not really having any sort of resolution to that conflict really hindered the film. Honestly, looking back at the film after seeing the ending, it makes things feel kind of confusing. There's the whole focus around wanting to tell a story about humanity. There's also this story about what happens when everything goes crazy on Earth and you're stuck in space. And neither of them really get a full, complete narrative. I think the humanity one definitely resolves a little bit better. When I look back on it and reflect on it after seeing the end, it makes me wonder exactly what the film was trying to say, and I definitely understand the humanity side of it, the whole beyond borders we come together as humans, and I do like that. But there's other narratives within here that just feel pointless, like the mice. What was the point of the mice? It's a whole big thing, where the main character, played by Ariana DeBose, brings aboard these test mice, like they're lab rats kind of thing, but, you know, test mice. And it starts off seeming like they're gonna be important. Like, we spend time focusing on them, and there's a small twist around the mice, kind of. There's something happens, and she's forced to acknowledge it and confront the other members of the ISS about it. But then nothing happens. That's it. That's it. She confronts someone, doesn't get an explanation, and that's the whole end of that arc. As I've said in other reviews, I'm a really big fan of setup and payoff in a film. I think it's really important and is just something that makes me so happy. And there's a lot of setup and a lot of payoff, but it's so blatant, to the point of being really excessive, and it makes the movie really predictable. Towards the start of the film, our lead character, Kira, gets a tour of the ISS, but this whole tour is used just to set up things that are going to happen later. And it's every detail, too. It's really obvious. For example, without getting too deep into the film, there's a point where he talks about these keys, how the Americans have keys and Russians have keys, and they open specific doors, and you're allowed to trade keys with the other nationality. The issue here is, you see that happen, you're like, oh, that will probably come in handy later. But then they don't leave that alone. It's like, hey audience, just so you know, this is important. He brings up being able to open the other doors with the key as long as you traded keys with the other nationality. And she asks questions, well, why would we want to trade keys with somebody else? What's the point of this? And he goes on to explain, well, that this could be important for certain reasons. And they spend so much time on this that it's just so blatant that, hey, if you didn't get it by now, this is gonna be a big plot point. And of course it was a big plot point. It's kind of annoying. There's just so much exposition. And I get it, you're on board a space station, it's tight quarters, so there's not a lot that you can do in terms of show don't tell. But man, I really wish they did a little bit more showing and a little less telling. The writing in this film just doesn't feel very good. The actors definitely do the best that they can with it, and when they're actually talking just character-to-character moments about their own backstories, it was actually interesting. And I really think that's a credit to just the actors owning the lines and really feeling it, and doing the best they can with the tools that they're given. But as far as the writing for the story and the plot, it wasn't very good. It was way too much of spelling things out and just not trusting the audience to catch on to what you're doing. Another negative to note, the CGI in this movie is terrible. Like, just horrible. I was kind of willing to forgive it for a little while because maybe the budget isn't too great and you wanted to spend more time focusing on characters, and the actual interior looks excellent, and the way they simulate zero-Gs does look really good, but any scene that's on the exterior, even shots of the Earth from space, they don't look good at all. It's very much PlayStation 2 video game graphics. Again, I was willing to cut them some slack, but when the movie isn't really living up to any sort of potential, they may as well tack on that as a negative as well. There was actually one payoff that was done really well, and I do want to give them credit for that. That was the 3 knocks thing. This is definitely the most subtle they are through the whole film. But at the start of the movie, the Americans are coming on board the ISS and they get welcomed in by Russians. Apparently Russians have a superstition on the ISS where they have to knock 3 times before opening the door and letting in new crew members. And this was done really well. It's something that gets paid off later and is something that sticks with you, but it's not so blatant like the keys that I'm just waiting for it to happen. That comes back later in the film and it's like, oh, I remember that. What a great moment! That's a great payoff to the setup that we had earlier. But everything else is just so blatant that it gets overshadowed. Overall, it's an interesting concept, an interesting idea. It's well acted, but the execution just isn't the best. It's way too exposition heavy, and honestly, you get to a point where I'd rather just see what's happening down on Earth during this whole situation. I'm giving ISS a 6 out of 10. I didn't completely hate it. Like I said, there are a few redeeming qualities to it, but it's not something I can really recommend to anybody, and not anything that I'm looking to see again. Man, January was rough on movies this year. But since it's over, hopefully the coming months will have some more stuff to look forward to. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know in the comments below what you thought of ISS, or what's your favorite space movie? Not sci-fi, but space-centered movie. Subscribe for more reviews very soon, and until then, so long, friends.